Perfect. So before we begin, I want to note the traditional territories of several Indigenous nations that Sheridan College's offices are located, which includes the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. These traditional territories are covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two Row Wampum Treaty. I am very grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on this wonderful land. And as the weather is warming up, I highly encourage everyone to take a walk through the natural lands that you are surrounded by. For me personally, I'm currently on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and I'm very blessed today to actually take a walk, a nice little walk today. I was able to see some wildlife back into hibernation onto this beautiful land, some squirrels, and I even saw some geese today. I know how some people have some complicated relationships with geese, but it is nice to see some wild life back into the land. So I invite everyone to take the time to walk through the lands that you're surrounded by, either today or even this week, and be mindful of the life that is around you. Reflect on your relationship with the land and how you can reconnect and continue that relationship in this new season and the upcoming seasons. If this is the first public session with Edge, nice little introduction to Sheridan Edge and who we are. Sheridan Edge is Sheridan College's social entrepreneurship hub where impact and entrepreneurship thrive. We are a vibrant community of people from all backgrounds and walks of life who believe entrepreneurship can make lasting changes in society. We support change makers as they explore entrepreneurial approaches to creating a more equitable and sustainable world. And how we do that is we help founders grow ideas and ventures that support a triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and profit. We offer mentorship, learning programs, an inclusive community, co-working space, and funding. We also connect Sheridan students to opportunities to learn and work with startups and collaborate with community partners to support impact entrepreneurs in the region. And if you've been looking for affordable and centrally located co-working space in the heart of Mississauga, we have a co-working membership starting as low as $100 a month. This includes hot desk access to our kitchenette with all-day coffee and tea, meeting room time and discounts, a business mailing address, and a lot more. So we have also day passes available if you are looking to trial it out. And all of our plans are on a month-to-month basis and flexible for you and your teams. As a note for anyone that is a Sheridan student, we also give a free membership to Edge's Student Lounge, access to learning modules on entrepreneurship and change making, access to staff advisors, and a peer community as well. And if you are interested in any of these memberships, I will be putting the links into the chat. And last, we also have the another session that's coming up, another public session, not next week, but the week after, on the Tuesday, April 18th, we have Accelerating Growth Through Strategic Knowledge. So if you are interested in learning more and registering, I also put the link into the chat. And if you missed our public sessions, a great way to stay in the know of everything Edge, a great way to stay in the loop, follow our socials. So we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we also have a website. We'd also like to make a special announcement on behalf of our colleagues at Sheridan College who are working with Colleges and Institutes Canada to promote the 50-30 Challenge. The 50-30 Challenge is an initiative between the Government of Canada, Canadian businesses, and diversity organizations. The goal of the program is to challenge Canadian organizations to increase the representation and inclusion of diverse groups within their workplaces while highlighting the benefits of giving all Canadians a seat at the table. This includes founders, startups, and small businesses. So the call to action is to make the pledge, which takes about 5 minutes to sign. From there, you can start to explore resources, including a toolkit, which is a comprehensive collection of equity, diversity, and inclusion resources to help you work towards gender parity and significant representation of equity-deserving groups in leadership and on boards. So the link to the pledge and the toolkit, I'll also be putting into the chat if you are interested. And without further ado, what you're all here for, Ben is our wonderful facilitator from tonight. He is a founding team member and Pocketed's Partnerships Program Manager. Ben currently manages the company's strategic alliance network composed of over 190 accelerators, incubators, professional associations, and a B2B service companies across North America. Thank you, Ben, for coming and facilitating tonight with that. So virtual applause.
Erica, thanks so much. And everyone's probably thinking, the heck, that guy doesn't look anything like his picture on screen. But no, I got a haircut and I got glasses, so it is me. I was keeping an eye on the chat here, everybody putting in their music taste and who they've been listening to, and it's cool to see some T Swift in there. I personally not really a T Swift fan, but my partner, she is the biggest T Swift fan, and it's on nonstop in this household. So I basically feel like, even though I don't like her music, I know it pretty much by heart. Has anybody gone to any of her concerts? I'm not sure. I haven't been following closely if it's just in the US yet. Have there been any Canadian cities that she stopped at? If somebody's been, let me know, because I've heard it has been an amazing performance. So as Erica mentioned, I'm here today to talk all about grant funding. Super excited to have everyone join us this evening. As Erica mentioned, a founding team member of Pocketed here. We are a platform built to make non-dilutive funding and grant funding easier to access in your business. We're women founded and women led, and we believe that everybody has the right to access government funding for their small businesses. And there's a lot that you can do with this. So I have a couple goals today, and I'm going to just start off with a quick agenda. This is what we're going to be working through. So we're going to start off with a bit of an overview on Canadian grants basics. So some of you on the call here today may have had success with grant funding in the past. That's okay. There's still going to be some good information for you in this section. For those of you who are brand new to grant funding, you're just getting started, you haven't applied to your first grant, and you're wondering where to start, this is going to be a good place to kind of get your bearings, understand a little bit more about what's out there, the structure of grant funding, and how we can utilize it. Then we're going to talk about some common grant misconceptions. So here at Pocketed, obviously we're working with grant funding day in, day out. We hear a lot of misconceptions and myths about grants from folks who are just coming to us for the very first time and just beginning to explore grant funding for their small businesses and startups. Then we're going to go through preparing to apply. And this section is actually taken from another session that we've run in the past with grant writers on the call. So this is going to be derived from a grant writer who is actually a professional who helps individuals, entrepreneurs, businesses, and founders write professional applications and help them increase their chances of success. So some good knowledge in this. And then we're going to look at using Pocketed as a way to support your grant funding needs and access grant funding a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. We'll close out today's session with some Q&A. Now, that said, I'd like to keep this conversational if we can. So please, if you have questions, as Erica mentioned, you can put them in the chat, or if you really need to, you can unmute yourself and yell, Ben, please stop, I have a question, and we'll address it really quickly. But anything that you don't get to as we're going through the session, just save it for the end, and we'll address it before we hop off today. Great. So before we hop into the content, the very first thing I like to do is give a quick overview and mostly just kind of run through the high-level names of the typical types of funding that we're probably familiar with as founders, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, right? So the first one on the list, we've got debt-based financing in the form of loans, right? Traditional business loans, something we're going to bring into our business that we eventually have to pay back, likely with interest, right? We're all very familiar with that. And the next one, friends and family. So friends and family is a great way to fund your business, especially in early days. You can ask for funding from those people that are, close in your network. Maybe a bit easier to approach them. The one thing I like to say with friends and family funding is to keep in mind that they're not professional investors. So that is one drawback. And you want to make sure that you're providing them with the right information as they're putting their money into your business. Then, of course, we have crowdfunding, different types of crowdfunding. We've got equity-backed crowdfunding. We've got gifted crowdfunding. We've got straight cash crowdfunding. Another great way to get some early stage funding into your business, and also a good way to prove your business model in a public space, right? It's gonna give you some good feedback in early days. And then, of course, we have investor funding. So this could be angel, this could be VC-backed funding. Another common way that business owners bring outside funds into their business to grow and scale, right? So The first four on this list, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Some of you may have utilized some of these funding types or funding sources, friends and family, business loans. Of course, what we're talking about today is grant funding, and grant funding is very different from the others on this list. Some of the biggest differences, you don't have to pay it back. You're not held accountable by investing third parties, and we're going to dive into that. But I like to kind of put this slide up in front of everybody first so that we have a good understanding of what else is out there. And now that we're going to be talking about grant funding, how it differs from the rest. So I have a question for you. Have you used a grant? I'd love to hear that in the chat. You can just say yes, you can say no. If you have, you can drop the name of the grant that you've used. I'd just love to get a sense of who here has used one in the past and who's brand new to it. All right. No. Yes, a school grant. Not yet. All right, awesome. So I'm seeing some yeses in here, which is great. Super pleased to see that some folks have applied to grants in the past. Sounds like a lot of you who have applied to grants in the past, it's maybe been a school grant rather than a business grant. And of course, these are very different. And then it sounds like there's a lot of folks who are brand new to grant funding, which I love to hear. And this is what I typically see is kind of the mix of folks who are attending these sessions. It's primarily folks who are coming to grant funding for the very first time, and you're looking to kind of just get a foundational understanding and get some direction on where to start. And then there's a couple folks in the room here who do have a little bit of experience with grants, and sometimes those folks can have some good insight. And so I encourage those folks who have applied to grants in the past, please, as questions are being asked, if you have experience yourself, you're more than welcome to jump into the chat and share that experience with the group. All right, let's get into the content. So Canadian grants landscape, an overview, right? So the first thing I want to do is define what are grants, right? And when we talk about grant funding at Pocketed, we use the term non-dilutive capital. And we use this phrase non-dilutive capital that helps you grow your business. Now, non-dilutive capital, what does that mean, right? There are two pieces and kind of two terms to this definition that we use. The first being non-debt capital and the second being non-equity capital. So non-equity capital means that you are not giving up any ownership in your business in order to bring on these third-party funds, right? And that is unlike a funding source like investor funding, where you may have to give up a small percentage or chunk of ownership in order to bring outside funds into your business to execute projects and scale and grow, right? So that's what non-equity means. Now, non-debt means that we do not have to pay this funding back. It is our funding to use. We can deploy it in-house on whatever projects that we secure it for, and we do not have to pay that funding back to an investing third party or a bank or somebody else in our personal network that has lent us those funds. So two very important terms here. Grants are both non-equity and non-debt. And being non-equity, especially in an early stage of your business, is super important because as you begin to grow, as you get to later stages in your business, and you start to approach people like VCs and angels and those folks who will be taking a percentage ownership of your business, you want to make sure that you have as much ownership, as much equity as you can when you're going into that to give you leverage and also not to dilute earlier investing parties. So I'm not going to dive too much into that and how that works as far as diluting early stage investors, but non-dilutive is fantastic because you're not giving up ownership, you're retaining that ownership, you're retaining that control, and you're not having to pay these funds back. So you're not on the hook for business growth. Even though, of course, we want to grow our business, you're not on the hook for that. All right, so now that we have an understanding of what grant funding is, how does grant funding actually work? And there's typically like three key steps that I talk about, and there's kind of a 2A, 2B, and I'll dig into that. So the three terms on the screen here, we've got projects, we've got cash up front, and then we've got reimbursements. So step one, and this is what I want everybody to think about when you're going to grant funding for the very first time, what projects do you need funding for in your business? So rather than going out and saying what grants are out there, what grants could be available to me, what grants are accessible to me, I want you to think about what projects do I have in my business that I need additional funding or starting funding for. That is going to greatly narrow your grant search. It's going to make it much more specific, much faster, and much easier to find a grant that works for you. So the first step, identify a project or a set of projects or a number of projects that you need funding for. That's step one. Now, step 2A, step 2B is going to be finding that grant that meets those project needs. So once we have identified the project, now we're moving into step 2, and that's finding a grant that meets the project needs. Step 2B, of course, applying to that grant and securing that grant. And something that's very important to know is that with most grants in Canada, you actually need to have cash on hand today to deploy funds and begin the project before you start to get reimbursed by that grant program. So cash up front is required. We can talk a little bit more about that if folks have questions. Step 3, execute and get reimbursed for your project expenses. So that project that we identified, now we found a grant for it. We've applied for that grant. We've hopefully secured that grant. We began to deploy cash out of pocket. Now we're going to execute on the project and get reimbursed for those funds and those project activities that we are spending money on. So it's kind of a 3-step process. Identify the projects up front, find a grant, apply for that grant, secure that grant, and then deploy the project activities and get reimbursed for those activities. The cash up front thing is very important, so make note of that. A lot of folks who are just getting started with grants are not too familiar about that. There are some programs that will give you lump sums or a little bit of cash up front, but this is an important thing to know. You do need a little bit of cash on hand today to begin to execute your projects, and then you'll be able to move on and obviously get those funds back. Saw a note in the chat that sound isn't working. If the sound is not working for anybody else, just let me know if it's my end or if it's individual, but I'll just keep going for now. All right, so I talked about identifying projects up front. That's step 1. So what projects can you actually fund? So when we talk about grant funding, we talk about 4 core categories or 4 core project categories that you can access and utilize funding for. And those are R&D or research and development, hiring, training, and then market expansion. These are the 4 core categories. Now, there was and has been a special 5th category of COVID-19 recovery funding. All these programs have effectively closed at this point. Some have rolled into newer programs with new names, but the 4 core categories remain the same. And as you're going through that process of identifying a project that you need funding for, I want you to try to bucket it within one of these 4 core categories. So research development, right? Business research, business development activities within your business. Hiring, expanding your team, right? Training, upskilling existing members of your team, maybe even upskilling yourself, right? Market expansion, expanding to a new market, international, maybe a new province, domestically. These are the types of activities that you can put into these 4 core categories. And again, this is going to save you time as you're beginning to look for grants that work for you. So how much funding is actually out there, right? What can you access? What is out there to leverage for your business? So when we talk about grant funding in Canada, we look at the figure of about 5.9 or $6 billion in annual funds available to small and medium-sized businesses, right? So this is a lot of funding. Now, this number is made up about $3 billion in grants. There's an additional roughly $3 billion in tax credits. And the nice thing about this is that it does fluctuate year to year, and there are thousands of programs that make up this $6 billion figure, right? So every year there may be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the federal, provincial government budgets and what they're deploying. But there are thousands of programs that open cyclically. So they may open in January, run all year, close, and open in January again. This number typically stays pretty much around 6 billion, with a little bit of leeway up or down. So a lot of funding available, and you know that it's going to be there to access. Give or take, maybe a couple million or maybe $1 or $2 billion. So a lot of funding out there, definitely worth looking to see if there's something that's applicable to you that you may be able to tap into. All right, so I have another question for the group. I would love to hear when you think it's the right time to apply for grants. So now we have an understanding of what grants are. We've got an understanding of what projects we can fund. We know how much funding is out there. I'd love to know, when do you think it's the right time to apply for grants? Perfect. Okay, I see some notes coming in. Anytime, daily, as long as they're available. When you need it, once everything's planned out, as soon as possible. Yeah, these are great answers. And so this is my answer here, and then I'm going to actually go back to some of the notes in the chat here. But my answer is, it's kind of lame, but if you need funding, it's time to start looking, right? And the reason why it's kind of a broad answer, and I have some additional, notes on the screen here, right? It doesn't matter what company stage you're at, right? It could be pre-revenue, be a late series company. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, be in agriculture, be in technology, be a nonprofit. All that matters is that if you have key projects and key desired business outcomes, it's a good time to begin to explore if there's a grant that will help you achieve that. So I saw some folks in the chat saying, is this applicable to nonprofits? Yes, this is applicable to nonprofits. What stage can we get or ask for a grant? That was a question that Purvesh asked. You can apply it at any stage of your business life cycle, right? And as far as project life cycle goes, most of the time we're going to want to apply at the beginning of the project, but in some cases we can actually get retroactive funding for our project. So still something that you should keep in mind. And this is particularly applicable with tax credits, right? So any company stage, any industry, there are grants out there accessible to you. So if you need funding, it's a good time to begin exploring. Now, I liked what Jasmine said, daily. That'd be awesome. If you're applying to grants every day, congratulations. Most folks don't have that amount of time. And so that's what I'm going to talk about next, why we built Pocketed, and then we're going to get back into the content. So there's 3 key reasons why a lot of founders don't, already use grant funding. And as we were building Pocketed, 3 key reasons that we uncovered for why they may not be leveraging it as much as they could be, right? So the first one, locating grants is a challenge. As I mentioned, there's $6 billion out there, thousands of programs available. Actually finding those programs is challenging, right? If we've got 1,000, 2,000 different programs, we've got maybe 500 different grant administrators. How do we actually keep track of everything that's out there, everything that is potentially accessible to us? And do we have the time to go through that process, right? So Jasmine, you said daily, I apply to grants, that'd be awesome. But do we really have the time to every day be checking in on what grants are available, what grants have just opened, what grants are closing? That's a lot of time that we don't necessarily have as busy founders and entrepreneurs, right? Now, the second piece is that requirements can sometimes be pretty unclear. Now, we're spending a ton of time up front finding the programs. Of course, we want to easily access the requirements for that program so we know if we're actually able to, take advantage of that, in our business ourselves, right? And then some programs don't even have the requirements, obviously, on their website. So MyTax is a good example. MyTax, and I'll actually just type the name out because I had a question about this in the last session. I mentioned MyTax. MyTax has a number of different grant programs that you can access. There's a lot of academic focused and business development focused grants. A lot of times you have to click through several different backlinks on their websites. Sometimes you even have to reach out to their team to get the final details and the final information on the requirements of the program. So this is a great example of sometimes requirements are very unclear, even if the funding is accessible to us. And the third piece is that support can be difficult to access. You may not even realize that there's support out there as far as professional grant writers, grant advisors. And so we understood that folks were not necessarily aware of this and then not able to access the correct grant support for their journey. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to get back into the content here right after this slide, but that's why we built Pocketed, right? These 3 reasons: the fact that it's so hard to find, it can be difficult to actually figure out if you're applicable for these grants, and the fact that support is not as readily available. We built Pocketed to solve all of those needs and then some. So basically, Pocketed is an updated and refreshed take on the grant funding industry. And what we do is we'll actually match you with eligible funds so you don't have to think about that component. All you have to think about is applying to the grants. And if you don't want to think about that, we can help you with that too. So there's over 10,000 businesses that utilize Pocketed today, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But grant myths, right? What are some things that we hear from these 10,000 plus businesses that aren't true, that I want you to know aren't true before you get started? Now, the first one is that grants have too many strings attached, right? I don't even want to touch grants. I don't even want to think about grants because there are just so many reporting requirements, documentation requirements, and application requirements. So yes, it's true. You do have to submit reporting. You have to keep track of your expenses. You've got to obviously keep that all together and report on that to get the money back. And you do have to apply. But when we are talking about grant funding in comparison to the other funding sources that I recapped at the beginning of the session today, right? Friends and family, debt-based financing through traditional business loans, investor funding, we have a ton of flexibility, right? we're choosing the projects that we're working on. We're choosing that up front. So we're not, we're not listening to outside third parties saying you need to be working on this after we get the funding in. We already know this is what we're applying for the funding for. This is what we're going to utilize it for. And it's what I want to do in my business, right? We're also not obligated to pay that money back. So unlike a loan, we don't have to return the funds with an increase, a interest payment on those funds. They're ours to use and ours to deploy. And then we're also not obligated to deploy all the funds if we secure the funds. So let's say we secured a $10,000 grant. We don't actually have to spend the full $10,000 if we don't have a need for it. And you will not be penalized for that. If you got $10,000 from friends and family funding, they're going to expect that you're spending that $10,000 on projects, and they're going to want a return on that eventually. So unlike these other, more typical traditional sources of funding that we're familiar with, grants have a lot less strings attached. The reporting is not that hard. The application process, as long as you understand what you need to do, not that difficult. So grants, not too many strings attached. The second is that if I'm not in tech, there are no grants for me. Completely false. I mentioned earlier, any industry, right? Agriculture, hospitality, arts and culture. There are grants for every single industry. And even if you're not in tech, you may still be able to utilize a tech-focused grant for your business. And this is an important one, so I want everybody to make note of this. Positioning your business based on the project you're working on, rather than the business itself, can allow you to secure tech funding for a non-tech business. So we had a taco food truck, okay? Like a taco that you eat and a food truck on the street, very traditional business, non-tech business. They were able to access a tech-focused hiring grant. So this was a hiring grant that was pretty much blatantly outlined. This grant funds technical roles for career development of youth in Canada. And we were able to get this technical grant for a non-technical business. And can you guess why? You can probably guess why. It's because they had a technical project, right? They were building a website. They were building an e-commerce component to their business. And so even though they weren't tech, they were a taco food truck, they were still able to get this technical funding grant for their non-tech business. So if you're not in tech, don't let that scare you off. There's grants out there for you, and you can still utilize some of those tech grants, even if you're a non-tech business at heart. And the last one here, when I apply, does not impact my success. This is not true, and it's not true on two accounts. So there are two types of grants. You have non-competitive and competitive grants. Non-competitive grants basically have a pool of funding, and if you have an applicable project you need to apply, they will begin to disperse that funding to applicable projects. So in this case, timing really matters, right? Because if that pool of funding is drained and you apply later in that process, there are going to be no funds left for you. So of course, in this case, timing matters, right? Now, the second case, competitive grants. These grants are actually going to be taking your application and comparing them to other projects and applications that are coming on along with yours. So in this case, it's not a matter of, is there funding available and do you have an applicable project? It's more a matter of, do you have an applicable project and how strong is your applicable project compared to other projects that we're looking at, right? And you may think, in this case, timing doesn't matter, right? They're going to wait until all the applications are in, evaluate mine, and then if mine's stronger, I'll get the funding. Not the case. In a lot of cases, competitive grants will still begin to evaluate in stages. So even if they're open for 3 months and they say they're open for 3 months, maybe after 3 weeks, they're going to take all the applications that have been submitted so far, evaluate those next against each other, and begin to deploy funds to some of those projects. Now, if you apply after that 3-week period and you're thinking, well, there's 3 months for me to apply, there's already funds that are gone, right? Funds have already been distributed, so that pool of funding is less for you to tap into, and you're competing against everybody who already applied and did not make it through that first round. So this is really important. If you can apply early, do it. If you can't apply early, it's not the end of the world. Still submit the application, because sometimes these programs will waitlist you. They'll come back with additional funding. So don't scare that off. Don't let that scare you off. But if you can apply early, please do try. Okay, great. TJ has a question about Pocketed ourselves. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. in a moment here, and then I'll explain a little bit more about us. But to get matched with grants, we're actually able to give that to you for free since you're joining as a part of the Sheridan Edge community. So I'll drop a link in a minute here. Make sure you stay on for that link, because that link will give you free access to the grant matching component. So that's going to save you a ton of time. So I'll drop that in a couple minutes here. So I want to talk about securing funds and give you some tips. And as I said, these come directly from our grant writers. So these are professionals that have kind of built their career around writing grant applications for business owners like yourselves, for founders, for entrepreneurs. And so some of these are going to be a little bit of a repeat from some of the things I've already talked about, and some of them are going to be brand new. So this is kind of like almost like a workshop component of our presentation today. Okay, so the first piece here, tips from our grant writers, is eligibility and preparedness. And eligibility and preparedness really, really count, right? So the first step is going to be evaluating and figuring out basic eligibility for your business, for you as an individual, the project activities, and then how that stacks up to the grant that you're applying to. So there are some common eligibility criteria for all grants. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. And there's some common eligibility components for business owners. These could be things like when your business was founded, what industry you're in, how many employees you have. These eligibility components are going to obviously dictate what programs you're eligible for and what programs you can apply to. Knowing this is important. Now, the second note that's on the screen here, I've talked about this in the case of the taco food truck. You may be more eligible than you think. And in some cases, it's a matter of being creative, right? When you think about a grant application, almost like a marketing or sales pitch, right? How can you position yourself? How can you position your business? How can you position the project to fit what that grant is asking, even if at face value, you're not like explicitly applicable for that program, right? So this is the first thing, right? Basic eligibility, first and most important step. Now, getting prepared, getting these common and basic business info details together, having it ready so that you can save as much time and basically expedite that grant application process is also crucial, right? So knowing timelines, knowing the common grant requirements, thinking in terms of projects, all super important. And I'll show you right now some of the information that you begin to put together to kind of create a grant funding document to make your life easier. So on basically every single grant application you submit, you're going to need a business number, you're going to need a company description, company address, contact info, incorporation date. Obviously, when we're looking at this, you're probably thinking, Ben, this is like the most basic rudimentary information on my business that I could possibly have. Yes, it is. But just put this in a centralized doc, get this ready for yourself and title it, grant funding application doc. And then as you begin to write grants and you learn more about the process and the application process, you can add notes there. But this is going to be a reference point for you, for your team in the future, so that you're not having to pull all these details together from all over your different, all over your organization just to put an application together, right? Just make it easier for yourself, consolidate it, keep it in one place, and then add notes as you're beginning to learn more about applying to grants and how you can successfully secure grants. Just going to click the chat for a sec. Would you say that Pocketed has a database of all available grants in Canada, including new and current grant? Yes. So Favor, that's our goal. We have coverage. We have full market coverage. And if there's a grant missing, typically we'll have that in within 24, 48 hours if it's a new one. We've got an entire team that's dedicated just to keeping our database fresh. So I believe the total count of grants that we have in the database is just shy of 2,000. So yes, definitely Pocketed is basically a market representation. So if you're looking for a centralized source of truth for grants, great place to be. If I have a business identification number, does that count? Yes, that does count, Hannah. Okay, cool. So you can take a screenshot of this. I'll share the slides afterwards as well, but just some basic info that's good for you to have on hand. Now, some top tips from our grant writers. The first, prepare in advance. So check your eligibility, check your deadlines, collect those common requirements that we saw on the last slide, and then obviously a few others. Shape your project. So marketing, sales pitch, position the project in a way that meets the grant requirements, and then determine if you need that professional support. Do that up front so that you're not spending a ton of time trying to, start the application process and you realize it's not working out. In 2 slides, I have some tips on when it might be the right time to use a grant writer, but figure that out before you start so that you can just save as much time as you can. Timing matters. We talked about this already, right? So apply as soon as possible for grants with ongoing applications. And if you need to adjust your project scope based on the funding calendars. So I mentioned earlier that grants are cyclical, meaning that they'll open and close throughout the year, sometimes once a year, sometimes twice a year. Sometimes you need to adjust your project scope to meet that funding calendar. And this is something you can likely do if you're a smaller startup and growing business. You can likely adjust the scope of project to meet those funding cycles. Tip number 3, writing does matter. So our grant writers say kind of a minimum of a college level essay or a newspaper article quality. So we don't want to have, a ton of spelling mistakes. We don't want to have, writing that's hard to understand. We want to make sure it's concise. Again, I like to think of it as a sales or marketing pitch. If you have a background in sales or marketing, obviously that helps a lot. But you do want to have good quality of writing. Use appropriate language. So that might be appropriate business language. It could be, technical if you're a, very technical business. It could be academic if that's appropriate for the types of grants that you're applying to. Keep it as concise as possible. So there's going to be typically a lot of questions that are asked on grant applications. Keep it short, punchy. And then one thing that I also like to say is try to use the words, the keywords and the buzzwords that they have written in the grant application ask. So if they have a description of the projects that they're looking for, they have some key buzzwords in there, try to find those words, make note of those words and plug them in where it makes sense, right? Don't just like litter your entire application with those buzzwords, but try to plug those in strategically where it makes sense. And of course, then when the evaluator is reading through that, they're going to see, okay, this actually really does fit what we're looking for here. Again, hire a grant writer if necessary. Tip number 4, the project and funding ask really matters. So demonstrating why your project fits the ask that they're putting out to you definitely matters. And then 5, think like the funder. So if you were reviewing 100 applications, how good would yours be? And again, this comes back to positioning your project, selling yourself, selling your project, selling your business. This is real money, right? This is real money for our businesses. It's going to make a real impact. So don't be shy, right? Like do what you can to position yourself as best as you can to secure these funds. I want you to have these funds. You want to have these funds and you deserve the funds. So make sure that you're putting the effort there that's going to increase your chance of success. So when should you engage a grant writer? There are kind of 3 key things you should think about. 1, are you short on time? Are you short on capacity? How big is your team? Do you have somebody that can do this for you? Do you truthfully have the capacity to do this yourself? If not, hiring a grant writer, getting that ability to offload the project, have somebody with experience take care of it for you, that can be worth it, right? Number 2, you need that professional expertise. So maybe you're brand new to grant funding. You haven't done this in the past. You just want to make sure this is in the hands of somebody who's a professional, right? Good time to hand that off. Maybe you need somebody to do a once over. Maybe you've written your grant application yourself. You want somebody to review it. Make sure that, our grant writer here says depersonalizing your project in a business, right? Of course, we're all our number 1 fans, and we think that our project and our business deserves the funding more than anybody else probably, right? So sometimes having that grant writer come in and taking that, non-biased point of view on your application, they can give you some helpful feedback that will actually curate a stronger application and increase your chances of securing those funds. So another great time to engage. And then the last is you need strategic planning, right? So navigating the non-dilutive funding space can be challenging, of course, with different cycles of different grants opening and closing throughout the year. A lot of times you can time it pretty well. When we were building Pocketed in the first 12 months, we utilized $750,000, so $750,000 to grow our team and build the business. And basically for those first 12 months, we were almost only operating off of grant funding and then out of pocket from our founders. So if you can time it right and make strategic hires and build and grow your team around these grant cycles, there's a lot you can do, right? And so knowing how to navigate that cyclical nature, thinking and planning ahead can be a tremendous, tremendous win for any business. So that's another great time to engage a grant writer if you want their help in planning that process out. Okay, cool. Time to bug my school to offer a grant class. Yeah, Hannah, a good idea. Favor, what is the advantage of getting your basic pricing plan versus going to the Canadian business site? Yeah, totally. So the government of Canada does have like a grant search tool. It's a basic grant search tool. It's obviously not at the same level as Pocketed. We do have programs in Pocketed that are not on the government of Canada's grant website. We've actually talked to the government of Canada before to allow them to potentially use Pocketed as their tool, but that's not where we're at right now. There's programs on our site that are private level programs and are not on the government of Canada's site. You're also going to get access to, of course, an ongoing and updated list that's personalized to you. So you create an account with Pocketed, that's an ongoing account, and you're going to get constant updates on what new programs are being added, what programs are opening, what programs are closing. And of course, you're going to get that additional intelligent insight. So we're actually going to help you with the grant application process. We have a Chrome extension tool. We've got specialized insights as far as keywords that you can use. We've got additional resources. So definitely a lot that kind of sets Pocketed apart from like the government of Canada's free website. And as I mentioned, we've talked to them about it before, and they've definitely expressed interest in our technology. But yeah, you're getting a more comprehensive look and an ongoing personalized experience with Pocketed. Nathaniel asks, how much is a grant writer to hire? It's a really good question. So most grant writers in Canada work on a conditional success-based fee. So what that means is that you'll come to a grant writer, they will write the program for you with the condition that if they successfully secure you the funds, they would like a percentage payout of the grant amount that they've secured for you. Now, this amount is typically around 15 to 20%. It sounds a little steep at first, but you have to consider that they are getting no payment up front. So they are just writing the grant for you at, obviously the risk of not securing the funds. There are some grant writers that will also charge an hourly rate or a flat rate. And so sometimes those will range between maybe 5 to 10K, depending on the grant size, or an hourly rate of maybe $100 to $200 to $300 per hour. So it does range, depends on the writer. When you reach out to Pocketed, we can definitely give you more information on a writer that might be suitable to you. Okay, cool. So we've had a lot of really solid questions, and I know, Favor, you've been asking a lot of good questions about Pocketed. I can tell that you're excited to learn more about it. So let's take a quick look at Pocketed together. I'm going to stop the screen share and start a new one. And then while I stop the screen share, I'm going to drop the link in the chat here. Now, this link, if you utilize it, it's going to add the code EDGE to your account. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to get you free access to Pocketed Basic. So Favor was asking about our different plans. We do have a number of different plans. We've got our basic plan. We've got our plus plan, which gives you more access to funding support. We've got our concierge plan. So EDGE is going to give you, the code EDGE will give you free access to basic. And then it's going to get you discounted access to plus, and then discounted access to concierge. So if you wanted to use either of those plans, you can get a discount. But I encourage everyone to use the code EDGE to set up your account for free under basic. That'll get you started, and then you can obviously decide later if you'd like to use one of our more advanced plans. So I'm going to start a new screen share here. Sorry, that's the plans tab. All right, we should be in the Pocketed platform now. If we're not, somebody can just let me know. But this is the homepage. So this is when we log in. This is what we're going to see. It's kind of a quick overview of some of the grants that we've matched with. Now, we're going to hop into the Explore Funding tab, which is kind of our grants dashboard. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time here in the brief demo. But this is kind of a nice quick recap when you first log on to Pocketed. Maybe you log on once a week, once a month, just to check what's new. It's going to let you know what grants are closing in the next 30 days. It's also going to let you know the value of those grants. So how much funding is accessible to you in the next 30 days. Keep in mind, my figures are a little bit skewed. This is a demo account, and so I pretty much have every single grant matched to me. You will not, you'll likely have about maybe 100 to 200 grants matched to you. I have 2,000. So going into our Explore funding page, this is our grants dashboard. There is a lot we can do from this page here. The first thing we're going to see is we're going to see our total number of matches. I have 2010, and these are going to show up in a list view just like this. Now I have 201 pages. I can sort through all of those. If I click into any single one of these grants, I'm going to see a description of the grant. I'm going to see how much funding is available. I'm going to see some special insights. This is available on Pocketed Plus. Keywords for that application process. Requirements for the grants. This is available on all plans, including basic. We're going to get deadline. And then there's additional resources. Again, this is part of our Pocketed Plus tier, so it's more that application support tier. But basically, you're going to get a really good insight into what is this grant, how much funding is available, what are the requirements. Now, keep in mind, these are already going to be filtered for you. So when you set up your account, you're going to get a short list of grants that already match your eligibility requirements, but these will be a bit more project focused. And then we'll know when we need to apply. Now, if we want to apply on our own, all we do is click apply now, and that's going to take us to the application portal. If you apply on your own, you pay nothing to Pocketed. You get the full grant for yourself. The only thing you're paying is the platform fee if you're on an upgraded plan. If you hire a grant writer, that's going to connect you with our team, connect you with an eligible service provider. And of course, in this case, you'll be paying a fee for that application support. Now you may be thinking, Ben, how do we narrow this list down? Because even though I understand I'm not going to have 2010, how would I narrow a list of 200 grants down to a short list of grants that's more applicable to the projects I'm applying to? So we can do this in a couple different ways. First of all, we can search. So I mentioned My Tax today. If I search for My Tax, I immediately see I have 7 grants that match the My Tax funding program, right? Now, you can't exactly search for grants if you've never heard of them before. So along the top, we have a selection of filters that you can use. We have pre-populated filter packages. So you can say, I want funding for training my team. And that's going to create a pre-filtered package that will show you a short list of grants that can help you with training your team. We've got a ton of additional options here that you can choose from. But if you'd like to create a filter on your own, all you have to do is click on more filters. And then we have a selection of click and choose filters that we can utilize ourselves. So let's say I'd like to look at unviewed grants. So grants I've never looked at before, open grants only. I'd like to look at grant funding, not tax credit, not loans. And I'd like to look at grants for hiring. And I'd like to look at grants for hiring individuals over 50 years old. So of course, you're going to need to spend a little bit more time probably than what I just did here. But let's say you spend 3 minutes going through this filtering. We've gone from 2010 grants to 25 grants in under a minute, right? So if you know what you need funding for, and again, this goes back to my think about the projects that you need funding for before you start to look. If you know the projects you need funding for, all you have to do, sign up, create your business profile, use these filters and narrow it down based on what you're actually hoping to achieve. And you'll get a easily digestible short list. I mean, 25, I can quickly look through 25 and maybe spend a minute on each. That's 25 minutes out of my day. That's nothing, right? And it's all for you right here in one place. We can also save grants that we like for later. We can share them with our team. And then on our Save Grants page, we can actually track if we've applied, if we've been approved, and if we're using the files. So this is a good way to look back at our success that we've had in the past. Now, there's a lot more within the Pocketed platform, right? So we've got learning resources, we've got perks from our partner community. So we work with companies like EY, we work with companies like Aiming, Apollo Insurance. So if you need these auxiliary services in your business, maybe a lawyer, you can access perks here within Pocketed as well. So a lot of additional things, but the main thing I wanted to show you was that primary dashboard, how you can filter your matches, and where you started with grant funding. So I'm going to switch back over to our screen share of our slides really quick. We're approaching time, and so I wanted to leave just a little bit of time at the end for any questions. So again, use that code EDGE, use the link that I shared in the chat. If you haven't already clicked on that, you can set up your account, as I said, for free. Pocketed Basic. That'll get you in, that'll get you your grant matches, that'll get you access to the filters. And that's pretty much all I had for content today. I know that was a hefty session. I try to pack as much as I can into our like 45-minute sessions. So I'll actually just put up the thank you slide really quickly here, because this has our contact email. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, learning a little bit more about grant funding and starting your grant funding journey for those who are just getting started for the very first time. I encourage all of you to sign up, as I said, for Pocketed Basic using the code EDGE. You can get access to that for free. That'll kick off your grant funding journey. If you have any questions, you can reach out to hello@hellopocketed.io. Just let them know that Erica and the team over at Edge sent you over our way, and we'll make sure that you get special support. I'm going to stick around until the hour, and I can stay a couple minutes after if we have any follow-up questions. But I'm going to take a look in the chat now and just thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Erica, for having me today. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, I got bumped up to the the top of the chat, and I was saying talk about Taylor Swift. So I haven't seen your questions yet. If there's some questions in here. Okay, cool. I've got a couple questions, so I'll answer these questions. Does the grant writer help you learn how to write for a grant? So this is a great question. Just like a tax consultant sometimes can help you kind of learn how to do your taxes, so in future years you don't have to do it, you don't have to use them again and you can do it yourself. Some grant writers will kind of do a review process for you and kind of help you through that process. So definitely, this can be a hands-on experience with a grant writer. You can begin to learn from them. You can hopefully then replicate that and do it again in the future. Again, though, even if some people know how to write grants, they might still use a grant writer just to save them on the time and capacity front, right? So you may be a really busy founder. You'd rather just hire somebody and let them do it for you rather than spending the time yourself. So yeah, they can help you with that. But some people, even if they know how to write grants, they just choose to offboard the work. Kim asked a question, what writing format this refers to, like a business plan? I'm not sure exactly what that question was in relation to, but definitely, Kim, for some of your applications, you will need comprehensive business plans. You will need budget plans. Having those on hand, having those ready, putting those together in advance is going to help you go through that process much quicker. Jasmine, you asked, I own a herbal hair company and need to expand. Can I get a grant for e-commerce? Yes. Come to Pocketed, send us a follow-up email. Happy to help out, but definitely sign up and look at grants for e-commerce. There's a couple that I'm thinking of. There's the Canadian Digital Adoption Program, which is actually a small amount of funding. I think it's under $10,000, but pretty much any Canadian business qualifies if you're working in the e-commerce space and you're building an e-commerce site. So definitely check that one out. It's called CDAP, Canadian Digital Adoption Program. There are many more out there. And as I said earlier, it doesn't matter what kind of business you are. If you're doing a tech-related project, like building an e-commerce site, doing work in e-commerce, definitely funding for you. All right, after that, I see some thank yous. Hannah asks, for grant writers, do they work commission or hour-based? So the answer to that, Hannah, is both, and it depends on the writer. So some writers will do commission-based, some writers will do hourly, some writers will do both, depending on the type of grant that you're applying to. So it does depend. The grant writer will let you know up front. You're not going to be, obligated to anything before you understand what the payment terms are. And the collective, yes, you can unmic for your question for sure.
Hi, I'm representing the collective. My name is Avery. So first of all, I want to say thank you for the terrific information you guys gave. It was very helpful. And, shout out to everybody who's listening to, who came up and showed up. I guess for briefing my context for my question is I'm an entrepreneur from Brampton, Ontario. I'm in the tech space and I'm building a whole application that's blockchain based in the Web3 tech space that's helping artists, empower artists. So simply earning for supporting artists. So I want to know what kind of grants would be available for me in that sector, in the blockchain sector, I should say.
Yeah. Echo. There we go. Okay, cool. Great question. In the space that you're in, there are going to be a lot of different grants that are accessible to you. You can pretty much utilize a grant from any of the 4 core categories that we talked about. So you could utilize hiring grants if you need to expand your team. You could utilize training grants if you need to, maybe upskill your own, yourself or another member of the collective. You could definitely do that as well. And then R&D grants, you could actually utilize if you are working in the, I think you said blockchain and Web3 space. If you're building in that space, you're doing research, you're doing technical development, a lot of R&D grants can actually help fund the salaries of like technical developers. So you're actually in a really good space where there would be a lot of different grants that are accessible to you. And what I would say is if you create your Pocket account, you'll build out a business profile up front. You're going to see the grants that you might be able to apply to, and then you can use those filters to work that list down to something that's more actionable. And so the two like pieces of advice that I have for you are, one, think about what projects you are looking to achieve and execute in your business right now. So are you trying to expand your team? Are you trying to, upskill your team? What is it that you're looking to really achieve? And then the second would be, don't limit yourself strictly based on the industry that you're working in. You can look at grants outside of your industry. Just make sure that they're applicable to that project that you've identified. So I know that that's a bit of a broad answer. To truly give you an answer of like XYZ program, we would have to sit down for like a consultation. But hopefully that gives you just a little bit of a foundation of where to start. Cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I definitely will follow up with that.
Yeah, no worries. One other thing I was just thinking of, you could always check out like the, because you mentioned like creators, and it sounds like you're doing like some artwork maybe in Web3. I'm not sure. I might be wrong about that. But the Canadian Council of Arts, I think I have that name right. Check them out. They have like 5 different funding programs that are then made up of like 10 different grants. And this is specifically for like artistic development and like those types of projects. And I believe there is one Web3 focused grant in their kind of repertoire of grants. So should be the Canadian Council for Arts and Culture. I think that's what it is. So you can check them out.
Sorry, one cool last question. I know I'm more music based, but I'm an artist, so that would kind of qualify too if I go check them out.
Yep. It's not just visual art, it's audio art, written art. So yeah, Canadian Council for Arts and Culture, a good one to check out. And Imani just said Toronto Arts and Ontario Grants Council and Brampton Arts. Yeah, those are also great programs. So the Canadian Council for Arts is like a federal program, and then there's provincial ones as well. Awesome. All right.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Avery, happy to help out. All right, so we're 5 minutes over. I know that there's still a couple questions in the chat. I do have to bounce off, Erica. If there are questions that people are like really dying to ask, maybe if you could just send those to Erica after today's session. Erica, you can send them my way, and then what I'll do is I'll have myself or somebody from the team just send you back an answer, and we can share that out with the entire group. But thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for sticking around a little bit longer. I hope you all got value out of today's session, and definitely excited to see some, if not all of you, on the Pocketed platform pretty soon.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yes, I will. If you have any more questions, feel free to type it into the chat, and I can definitely formulate all the questions and send them your way, Ben. Thank you so much for tonight. That was wonderful. And again, echoing what Ben said, hopefully you all consider going on to the link that he shared earlier. But again, thank you so much, Ben. That was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
And if you're still here, I am actually going to just share on the screen. Feel free, please take the time to fill out the form for today. The feedback form, we would greatly appreciate your feedback on tonight's session. And I'll actually also put the link into the chat as well too.
Where did you generate the QR code?
Sorry?
From which website did you generate the QR code? The T-Rex in the middle is quite funny.
Oh, it's through it's a Chromecast, the Google, no, not Chromecast. It's a Google extension. You can just make QR codes from a link.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for joining. And I'm gonna just ask SIC folks to just stay behind for 2 more minutes. Hannah, we're not going until 7:30, just maybe 7:10, depending on how long. Ah, beautiful. Thank you, the collective. This is also free as well, which is kind of cool, but yeah, the dinosaur in the middle is a funny little thing. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, yes, Ben, you're good to bounce. Have a good night.